This is House Planning Help episode 287. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in better homes. I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and try to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. Coming up in this session, my guest is Russell Smith from Parity Projects, and we've got a beginner's guide to retrofit. This will actually form part of 3 episodes as we focus on retrofit, a little mini-series for you. And just to give you some background, in case you're a newcomer to these parts, we've covered retrofit lots of times before on the podcast, but all of those are back in the day, because certainly when I was doing my own build, which was a new build, it just didn't seem to make much sense with me doing a lot of episodes on retrofit. So we said at that point, we'll come back to retrofit. We will come back. And this is one of those occasions because my house, oh my goodness, I've nearly been in it for 2 years. Where did that time go? We've also featured Parity Projects on the podcast before. We'll link in those episodes. But my dad on his house, or my parents, I should say, they had a home energy assessment. But it's my dad who appears in this video. So you can have a quick look at what a home energy assessment's all about and actually have a look at the house that I grew up in. In fact, as I record this intro, I'm off to see my parents in a few minutes, take the kids down there. They love a bit of time with Granny and Gramps. So we'll embed all of that into the show notes today. houseplanning.com/287. So let's get to our featured interview with Russell Smith from Parity Projects. And I'm blessed to meet lots of inspiring characters on this podcast, and Russell is definitely one of those. We all know that retrofit is necessary, and there are lots of benefits of carrying out a whole house refurbishment. However, the uptake seems to be painfully slow, doesn't it? And money often gets spent elsewhere. So it's never quite done on the scale which we would like here. So I really respect Russell for setting up a business that focuses entirely on retrofit. And he's got this relentless drive to get the message out there to more people on all of the benefits to do with retrofit, which makes him perfect for this episode, our beginner's guide to retrofit. So I started by asking Russell to tell me a little bit about his background.
I'm actually a chartered civil engineer. I renovated my own house, 16 years ago now. It was really on the back of a period of secondment into a charity called Forum for the Future, and you started to understand the gravity of climate change and the impact of the things that we'd never heard of. As a general member of the public, I hadn't really heard about the impact of energy, particularly starting to unpick the amount of energy and carbon emissions attributed to the housing stock. And it's very easy to put the two things together and say, crikey, we've got a hell of a lot of houses that are going nowhere. And, the average rate of change or knockdown and rebuild of a Victorian house, expected to be here in about 1,000 years' time. So, nobody appeared at that time, at least, to be looking at the renovation stock, where all the sexiness in the industry was all about new build. And I have to say, I don't think much has changed in that respect, really. But I said at that time that I'd try and do the best that I could with that particular Victorian property. I got the heating bills down to 50 quid a year. I had about 3,000 visitors come and look at the house over a period of 3 years. This is whilst I was renovating. And I was learning as I was going. So I could be fairly honest with everybody that came and say, this is what I've discovered. This is how hard it's been. This is how much it cost. Not as much as you think, provided you do it in the right way. So all those sorts of things, I was able to distill it and realise that, crikey, there's a business in this. But actually, it didn't have to be anything too mind-boggling technically either, provided that you get your head around this in the right way and take the customers on the journey. People were prepared to do that with you. So I started my own firm, and I've been doing it ever since because it's such a critical thing for us to try and achieve at scale.
Quite interested that you use the word renovation there, because I was going to ask, what's the difference between a renovation and a retrofit? Does anybody really know?
I think it's almost like a state of mind, or if you like, if you're retrofitting, you're retrospectively fitting things. That's where retrofit comes from. And effectively, you're chucking things at a building in the right way, but you assume that those things that you're doing are done in isolation. So people talk about whole house retrofit. Well, that's kind of complicating issues. What we're talking about is refurbishment. It's deep refurbishment, and ultimately every home in the UK is going to have a significant amount of work done to it in order for us to hit our climate change targets. And my view is if we all take the position that every house has to have that work done, and we either have the opportunity to do it all at once, which you could regard as a whole house renovation, or you're going to retrofit. In other words, you're going to do bits and pieces at a time, but provided you've got a game plan right at the start, knowing how everything should fit together in the long term, then your retrofits should add up to a whole house refurbishment in the long term. That's how it works in my simple mind.
How do we get this game plan then?
Great question. I mean, that's a customer journey that's taken a long time for us to work through with I and my colleagues at Parity Projects. And what some people suggest is that you need to just give the customer the first thing they see is a design for everything in the building. My answer to that is, well, that would work for a couple of people that are convinced that this is a thing that they want to do. However, 99% of the people that own buildings do not realize this is a thing. So if we attack them with an enormous pile of drawings and deep retrofit specifications, they're going to run a mile. So a whole house plan is something that I urge people to get straight away for their building, but that doesn't necessarily have to be something that requires deep calculation or something that's really going to take a huge amount of time and therefore cost. Our approach is to be able to use data that potentially already exists on the building, a set of calculations that are prevalent out there. So we do use the RDSAP calculation methodology that's used for the energy performance certificates. We throw away the energy performance certificate because it's hopeless, but we do use the data, we do use the calculation because it's widely known and accepted at government level. But what we don't do is then use that necessarily to go and create the deep plan for a whole house renovation. What we do is we get somebody at relatively low cost to a point where they understand the size of their problem and the size of the opportunity. So we show them all the things that are possible with the house. We show them all the things that are a priority, which is a subset of those. So quite a few of the things that we've analysed, we analyse deliberately knowing that they're going to be awful. But we show people that we've got to a point for their building that's impartially derived. They can throw some things away because it's been shown that they're pointless. And they arrive at a distillation of a package of measures for their property, which are very appropriate. That is a key point of building up the trust with your homeowner. And you do have to make them aware, okay, if we're going to the next stage, we need to really unpick the house. We need to go into proper detail. We need to do some more analysis. We need to use calculations that really try and make sure we pick out every single element of this building and what it's all about so that we can go forward with confidence. And I think that's a trick that we've missed in this country. I think there are almost seem to be people that want to leap straight to a deep calculation and charge people a lot of money straight away. And if you're somebody that's accepted that part of the journey straight away, great. But we're trying to build a model here that every householder in the country can understand, know what's next once they've had it and they're brought on a journey.
Can you give us an example of the two extremes then of what these measures might look like?
Well, I think I have to come back on you in that, Ben. I think actually, ultimately, all of these things need to be done to every house. So if I start at that point, the cleverness in the advisors that you would get to help you do your retrofit is how they all fit together. And it's particularly difficult to get all those things to fit together if they're not all done at once. So if you're phasing your renovation over time, you have to be pretty smart to be able to do that well and or experienced to know what doesn't work. So if I start with what would need to happen. So let's take what's the most common type of house in the UK? A 3-bed semi. Let's say a third of our buildings in the UK are solid walled. So let's take one of those, for instance, because they tend to be the toughest or so-called hard to treat. So when you take a building like that, you're in a position to be able to say, okay, well, where's my heat loss? Because ultimately we want to be able to reduce our demand for heat. That typically in a house is your biggest proportion of energy consumption stroke carbon dioxide emissions. So you want to be able to reduce your heat loss and you want to be able to reduce, secondly, your demand for hot water. So demand is what it's all about. Let's reduce our demand. Therefore, we need to pump less heat and hot water into the building. Makes sense. So from that front, if you've got a solid wall building, the biggest proportion of your heat loss will be the heat loss through your walls. So, of course, your listeners might be thinking, well, how the hell do you do that to a building that doesn't have a cavity? Because everyone keeps talking about cavity wall insulation. Well, there's two options there. You've got to put it on the outside of the house or you've got to put it on the inside of the house. And both have their pros and cons. If you're putting insulation on the inside of the building, you've got to be extremely careful, very detailed in the way that you analyse the opportunities that go into the building, making sure that you are working in balance with the way that building was designed to behave. And that's all about the moisture in that brickwork, because you might have moisture there already that needs to dry before you do the work. So if you're a solid wall homeowner in Swansea, your building will have very different levels of risk associated with it compared to someone that lives in the middle of London. So you need to be able to choose your measures carefully. And you might even argue in a situation in somewhere like Swansea, you wouldn't want to go anywhere near internal wall insulation unless it was dealt with very, very, very carefully. The external wall insulation option is actually relatively straightforward in some respects, as provided it's designed properly. So the heat losses in that instance would actually combine with another benefit of insulating that brickwork, and that is in retaining some thermal mass inside the building, so that actually your heat demand can be controlled much better, because the heat inside the building would be absorbed by the brickwork, and you can have a balance within the building, so that your heating system doesn't have to work quite so hard. And you just go around the building looking at all those options that are bespoke to that building in turn. So what's next after the walls? Windows and doors. And there's two elements to windows and doors. One is obviously the heat loss through the structure itself. And then there's the heat loss due to air infiltration around the structures as well, which unfortunately, typically in the UK, will be pretty high, because I'm not going to have any fans here, but the installation standards are extremely variable. And we need to be making sure these things are, if you're not going to replace them, the gaps around those structures are dealt with very well. The other two key areas of the outside external fabric, really, obviously your roof and underfloor. And it might not be well known, but typically underfloor heat losses on your ground floor are pretty enormous. I mean, I hate generic figures, but typically 15% of a heat loss of a building will be through the floor. And, how many people do you know that are jumping over themselves to try and insulate underneath their floor? We get a huge number of phone calls from people saying, my feet are quite cold, what do I do about it? And they've not considered that actually an enormous part of their bill is lost there. And we get the odd call from people that have put down a brand new engineered wood floor, and they're asking me how they insulate it. Well, first answer is, well, I really wish you'd called us a month ago. But the second answer is, there are people that can tackle those things now with robotics and what have you. But really, the point with all of this is you need to be thinking about your plan before you've done any of these things, not after. Moving on to the roof, obviously, it's a big part of the surface area of a building. So being able to tackle all those different types of roof there are out there in the marketplace is very, very, very key. But as you can probably imagine, as I've been talking about all these elements, they're all unique. They might all face a different way to the sun, have different amounts of rain incident on them. We need to care about the amount of ventilation that the wood in each of those structures might be having, so that they don't get moist and they don't start to rot over a period of time. So there is a level of uniqueness to every individual building that an expert has to consider in a lot of detail before you can start plonking bits of insulation on them. And Ben, the next thing we need to think about, once we've built a building tight and we've insulated very well, is ventilating. And it's one thing that as an industry, if you're non-expert in this space, if you're just focused on the thing you might have picked up at college, you won't really have been taught about ventilation. And once you get to a point where you're insulating more and you're decreasing the air changes that go through that structure as a result of that work, you need to make sure that there's a good level of air infiltration into the building, so that the air quality remains high for the occupants. So once you've got those things that they're dealt with in combination, you've resulted in a much lower energy demand than you would have done in the first place. And then that's the point to start considering your heating system and how you would put some heat into the building. Clearly, standards such as the Passive House standard deal with this head on, and it's critically important to be able to make sure that you are ventilating and insulating in combination, so you get to very, very low levels of heat demand, so that in some instances you can virtually do away with your heating system altogether, but not completely. And when you get to those levels of heat demand, you can start considering the amount of heat that might be coming off of all the appliances and the people that are in there, etc. It's a laudable aim for every property. But when we start coming up against things like cost and logistics, we have to appreciate that not every building in the country is going to ever reach those levels. That's when it starts becoming a little bit more complicated and actually much more difficult for an expert to advise a householder, because you're looking at budgets, you're looking at logistics and priorities, maybe even the underlying health conditions of the occupants and what their priority is for them for that moment in their life. And also the next occupant. the person that's going to buy that property next. How would they wish to live in that building? If you're only going to go halfway through that whole house plan, how do you communicate the next part of that plan to the next occupant? How do you make sure that they don't trip over things that you've left them, so that if you're only installing some of the measures, or you're only tackling some of the things you would want to do up front, really you want to make sure that those things don't have to be undone to do the next things later on.
So there's a lot in that, and you've hinted at some of the phasing, but really, would you be advising to just, you need to do this whole thing if you can?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, it definitely makes the most sense. It's the least cost way of doing it. You know, if you imagine that if what we're going to be doing over the next 30 years is, or hopefully quicker, by the way, is going to be just waiting for the kitchen to be done so you can insulate underneath it and behind it, or waiting for the bathroom to be done, or waiting for the extension to be done, and then you do a bit then, you know, that's fine. And I would say that a lot of people, they've got no other option. However, if you imagine you're doing the whole house at once, there's nobody living in the house. You don't necessarily have to tidy up completely at the end of every day. You can bulk buy your materials. You can consider the airtightness layer around the whole building. You can put in a ventilation system that copes with the entire building, not just one room at a time. Even common sense tells you that that's the right way to go. But we have to bear in mind that people, on the whole, don't have somewhere else to go while this happens. You've got to bear in mind that people haven't all got all the money at once. So, you know, there are challenges in that respect, and we have to bear those in mind.
Are you finding that it's a certain group of society then that's doing these retrofits, or is that complete nonsense?
Oh, crikey. It's a loaded question, really. The people that have been trying this for a long, long time, they completely get it. So I would say at Parity, we've been giving advice to people for 15 years. And we've kind of started to run out, as my colleague David would say, we started to run out of professors called Anne that live in North London that are quite wealthy, and they completely understand climate change. But as people start to realise this is not going away, I think we've definitely seen a change. I would say even in the last 4 or 5 months, the Extinction Rebellion narrative now and their presence has had a massive impact. We've started a couple of schemes now with central government support in a couple of parts of the country, specifically trying to target people that do have the money to do this straight away. And, you know, it's not a question of getting people to understand what a heat pump is anymore. They know what one is and they want one. In many respects, we have to try and get them to calm down a bit because the house doesn't suit a heat pump. We have to get them to get the house to a point where the heat pump is ready for them. So there's definitely a level of awareness. There are young families that have just bought their first home, for instance, and they want to get it right at that stage, and they're going to live. They know they're going to live there for the next 20 years, so they want to do all the right things straight away. It's not just Professor Anne; it's a whole range of people. But obviously, social landlords have had a big role to play in this market as well. They've been doing quite a bit for a while. I would say, given their budgets and their power in the marketplace, they haven't been doing enough. But they're distracted because there's a lot of new build going on. There's a demand for housing, and they've had to put all of their efforts into that. And they probably can't borrow any more money because they're completely up to the hilt in borrowing simply because of that. So doing more on the retrofit front is hard. So they're having to do things piecemeal as they fulfill their asset management plans. So I realise that's not a straight answer for you.
No, that's all right. We're used to things like that.
Okay.
And just thinking about how we're spending money as households, is it possible that we're missing a trick because we just want a new kitchen, or the money's going elsewhere into some other fund when actually it could be going into the house?
Completely. There's one thing I talk to our counterparts at Bays about at central government very often now is this need for a national campaign to raise awareness of the multiple opportunities there are with retrofit. Just one roll of loft insulation into the house of 10 different people, you know, they might be motivated 10 completely different ways to have that insulation in the property. It's going to help that building warm up more quickly. There's a level of airtightness there that's improved, provided you combine that with ventilation. You know, that respiratory problems are solved. The value of the property might go up. The landlord might be able to put a bit more money on the rent, as long as it's done ethically, in brackets. You know, so all that kind of stuff. It's just that people just aren't aware of it. They're super, super surprised. Even my friends and family, when I keep talking to them about this stuff, and I do, even though I do this and I've been talking about it for a long time, it's just not in their psyche. So we need central government. It's an absolutely critical thing now. If they're going to do nothing else, just to try and have a concerted campaign, which might now be, the door might be open to that on the back of how society is pulling together on the back of the coronavirus. to have a concerted campaign of trying to get people to understand the real potential of their property, where it can get to, provided they make very good, strong decisions, and they have this notion of this whole house plan. I think it's central to that, so that they know everything that needs to happen with that building over the next 30 years. It's got to happen. We've got no choice. That is going to happen, so that when they are planning their shiny new kitchen or the new bedroom, or they're just redecorating, they can incorporate those things into their thinking. It does need to be followed up with, of course, by potentially some low interest finance for people that don't have that money. But we're seeing a lot of work being done in the finance space now. That's potentially green mortgages to be tagged onto this kind of work, so that people can pick the right sort of finance at the right sort of time. Even decent equity release options out there now as well, so people can really choose the right thing to go forward with.
A word on quality then. I understand the whole house plan idea, and if you're doing it, that's great. But if you're not in our area, how do we pick someone that's actually going to get this right? Because there is such a thing as bad retrofit. Yeah,
no, completely. It does. I'm dismayed by the sort of the reputation of the industry. I mean, fortunately, I've spent most of my time with some really good contractors, designers who want to do the right thing. And in fact, I've never met anybody that deliberately wants to do a bad job. I think on the whole, what we've got is a fragmented industry of people that know how to do their thing, and that's all they want to do. And really, they don't communicate enough with the people around them to try and get the whole thing done well. So I think that's a key problem for us. So quality starts at the design. It starts at the point where somebody is putting the right list of things together, explaining that list extremely well to the contractor, so that they, in the first instance, can actually price up the damn job well. And I think that's where things tend to fall down. Until things actually start properly and the client's properly spending money, are people willing to put the effort in to try and provide the clarity so that everyone can move forward with the job. I think people tend to bash contractors in the first instance for poor quality. But the bottom line is, if the contractor's not been told what to do very well, then it's never going to work. So one thing we've tried to do over the last 7 years is, with this cooperative we've set up called Retrofit Works, is try to bring all those disparate parts of the industry together as part of one organisation, so that we can all work together to design the customer journey and the schemes within which we all operate, so that the communication is good, the tools that everyone has got at their disposal to do the design and to communicate with each other and to implement the work, and so that somebody can check everything, every step of the way, is all there. And we've been allowed to work in silos for far too long now, so that everybody thinks they've done their thing well, and sod the person that comes next. And I think Grenfell is a very sad tale for the way that the industry has ended up pushing itself down a particular way, trying to cut the corners and costs out of every single step of the process, to a point where we've ended up where it's just finger pointing. Whenever anything goes wrong, it's just all the money gets spent on is lawyers trying to unpick everything and trying to make sure someone is to blame, when actually a bit of cooperation and collaboration at the earliest stage by everybody involved in the project solves most of those problems. And we've managed to do that really successfully with Retrofit Works over the last 7 years, and it's going from strength to strength.
Now, you seem to have a lot on your plate, and I know particularly about a couple of your projects. You've talked about bays as well, but the pilot schemes. Let's run through one of these, because my production company, Regen Media, has made some videos for Cozy Homes. So what is that scheme, and why is it up and running, and what is it hoping to prove?
Okay, so Cozy Homes Oxfordshire is a manifestation of the key partners that we built up in Oxfordshire. So whilst Retrofit Works on the one hand brings this model saying, okay, we've got all these members, we've got contractors, we've got designers, we've got retrofit coordinators, and these people together can deliver renovations to houses. What it needs is to work well in an area or in a constituency of customers. By working with Low Carbon Hub in Oxford and National Energy Foundation in Milton Keynes, what we're able to do is define what we think the customers within Oxfordshire need. And we define the marketing, the approach the customers want. We design our processes as a cooperative behind all of that. And we push forward with the advice, the whole house plans, the detailed design, and putting a tender process in place so the right contractors are selected, and we make sure they do their work well. So what what central government has done, they've bought into this model and they've given us some funding to push that on. Because the challenge for putting these things in place is that you're not sure that someone's going to buy the product. And in many senses, there is far too much at stake for government to just let the market make this happen, because it hasn't happened. It hasn't really come to life since I started this 16, 15 years ago. So it does need a little bit of a nudge, and fair play to central government for allowing us to have some funding which pays for the working capital of that model. So in other words, we invest a lot in the marketing, reaching customers, giving the advice in the hope that we earn enough money in the long term to pay that back. And the model, it does seem to be bearing fruit. The model itself, at the start of all this, the idea was that for £1 million worth of working capital, we could tackle the renovation of the able to pay type customers of about 500,000 houses. So, and that money would be paid back over about 5 or 6 years, given the amount of demand we think we'd generate. Now, I would say we're learning a lot. I think it hasn't helped that the funding hasn't necessarily been available for very short term. So it's been year by year we've been working with that money. If we'd have had a guaranteed funding for a longer period, I think we could have moved much more quickly. But having said that, we have more customers that we can handle. The challenge there has been getting supply chain on board, coming up with a model that they're willing to work with. And I think these problems we've had are local to Oxfordshire because of the nature of the industry. Other parts of the country, so we're working in Sussex, Warmer Sussex is the scheme down there, and we're about to launch in London as well with a scheme called EcoFurb. We have established supply chains in those areas that we work with for quite a long time now. They trust us, we trust them, and our processes have really been optimised because of those relationships. Whereas we're starting from scratch in Oxfordshire with new faces, and we need to build up that rapport over a few jobs. So it's been a little slow to get going in Oxfordshire, I will be honest with you, but we are definitely getting somewhere. And the reports, at least, people love the idea of these whole house plans. It really gives them the clarity and the detail that they need to be able to take the next step.
And are we thinking that we're going to bring new labour into the industry, or is this retraining of existing skilled people?
It's all of that. If I could give you a flavour for the numbers, we did some work at the end of last year to model all of the work that would be needed in the UK to complete the renovation work for the housing stock. To meet what we only have at the moment is an interim target set by government to hit a minimum of an EPC score of a C for every house in the UK by 2030. So 10 years. That is in effect trying to renovate 26 million buildings in that time. We, using the Parity Projects modelling tools, we're able to identify which measures will be required in each house over that period. So when you work that back, you can then start to identify how many people would be needed to do that work. Based on around about 160,000 people working in this particular industry at the moment, we need to virtually triple that number in order to hit these targets. So it's not just a case of retraining all those 160,000, which I think retraining is probably a bit of a harsh word. They all broadly know these things, but they've never been asked to do it. So they need a refresher. They need some guidance for the detailed stuff like air tightness, making sure the insulation is installed well, putting windows in properly. They don't need training. They need coaching, I think. We need them to get on with it straight away, and they need people on the ground to show them how to do it properly. And what about the rest? There's a massive gap there. Where are those people going to come from? We haven't even recovered the numbers in our industry following the 2008 economic collapse. So we need to get back up to those. In fact, we're at 240,000 people in industry back at that particular time, but we need to get up to about 380,000 people. So those people need to come from other industries that might be waning. They need to be coming from people that are bored doing other things. We're talking about quite a change in the way our industry has to be considered. We really need to think of innovative ways of getting people into the industry to do this, and it's more than just putting them on the existing training courses, because in my view, the existing training courses being run in colleges are not fit for purpose. They are, from day one, putting people in a position where they are in their silos. Something I described earlier on as a major factor in how our industry fails to function well. I personally think all college students need to be on the same course for about a year at least, so they all know the same stuff, and from that they start to develop their specialisms, and then they can talk to each other properly on site. rather than the plumbers having a row with the electricians about who should sweep up at the end of the day. We're all on the same plane, knowing where we're all headed. But we've got some big opportunities out there as well. We've got factories closing down, and there's quite a long period of time before that will genuinely happen. So why can't we be training up these people in their lunch breaks or after work or whatever, so that they actually got the right skills? And this will be managerial skills, not just people working on the tools. There's a range of people that could be becoming available in a defined area. We should be working to try and get these guys mobilized, and quickly. And this is something that's really going to change the nation, I think. So if that sort of model of retraining combined with this notional government national plan for how we can get the whole country renovated, I think we're onto something. I think it's something we really want to be able to get into. And parents will no longer be telling their kids they should be a doctor and a lawyer when they leave school. They might be encouraging to get into something that's actually going to have a practical aspect, really will make a material difference to every household in the country. And we can actually see the outcomes of that, which will be minimising our impact on the climate.
Well, Russell, just finally then, if we're going back to looking at our house and thinking we want to get this done, are there any useful bits of information or resources or anything that you would tell us? We're not going to get scared off at any point. What comes to mind?
I would say it'd be worth getting in touch with one of your local retrofit coordinators. And there are this is a relatively new qualification, frankly. It's kind of what I've been doing for 15 years, but I've never been able to give it a name before. But effectively, there's a small army of these retrofit coordinators out in the market now that are able to give you the advice, and they've got the technical knowledge to be able to pull a plan together for your property. But other resources out there, if you went onto the AECB website, there's a section on there called Knowledge Base, and there's a whole load of stuff on there that you can read for free. Other things that are accessible if you're a member, so join. But in general, I think we've let householders down in this country really on a portal for knowledge for how to retrofit homes. There are a different range of organisations out there that do have some things on their website for free. CSE in Bristol, Centre for Sustainable Energy, they've got some really lovely things on their website that you could have a look at too. But on the whole, I would say try and get your local professionals and contractors to you to start to wake up to this, because they know most of this. They just need to work with a retrofit coordinator or similar to be able to pull it together. That's the way to do it. I would say we need to try and build a legacy from each, even if it's just one job. If you're going to do your home up, try and just accept that some of the people on that job will need to learn something. Point them in the right direction. But I would say if you're a homeowner starting from scratch, which is where I was at 15 years ago, in a home, living on my own, the whole house was pulled apart and I was trying to work it out as I went along. It's dreadful. Just try and team up with some professionals that genuinely want to help. Having a professional out there that's got the right attitude is critically important. Even if they don't necessarily know it, they will learn. They will find out. And, well, I don't know, get them to give me a call. I'm happy to help, provided I've got the capacity. And, okay, admittedly, the capacity is very thin at the moment. But we've all in this together. Ultimately, every building needs to be renovated, and the sooner we start, the sooner we'll get there.
Well, Russell, fantastic to have a chat with you. Keep up the good work, and thank you very much.
Cheers.
Head online to take a look at the show notes that accompany this session, houseplanninghelp.com/287. You can review the main information once again in our summary of the chat that you've just heard. There are also a few photos. You can check out some successful retrofits. Perhaps you have a comment or you'd like to ask a question, then there's an area that you can fire away with that, or tap us up on social media. We'll link you to Parity Projects and the various other links that we mentioned, including Cozy Homes. Now, this is something that my production company Regen Media knows quite well. We've made some animations about what Cozy Homes do, and also a year or so back we headed out with Charlie Luxton, and this is definitely worth a watch. TV presenter Charlie Luxton, Building the Dream and numerous other shows, but he came out and headed around his home area too. That's what made it even better, and looked at a variety of different renovations, all tackled with slightly different measures. So we'll link all of this within the show notes today, houseplanninghelp.com/287. Let's finish on a hub update. This is our membership community for self-builders. We're focused on new build in here. Maybe one day we'll cover retrofit too, but that for now, new build if you want to create an energy efficient home. There's a new live training that's gone into the archive, and this is with Jean-Marc Bouvier from Nadura, and he gives us the lowdown on insulated concrete formwork. Yes, concrete, we know it's got a high embodied energy, but there may be situations where it makes sense, or you may be someone who's just drawn to it and you want to build that way. But certainly things like basements when you're below ground makes a lot of sense there. And Jean-Marc as well, if you check out this live training, you'll discover that he's been working on a celebrities build, which I thought was interesting, in the property area. Someone you'll definitely know. He just got off site. It's full of energy, and you wouldn't be able to tell that he'd just had a day of hard work, hard graft, building on a celebrities project. So houseplanninghelp.com/join if you want to learn more about that. That is it for today. We'll continue our retrofit series next time. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.